Today we are playing Unholy Death Knight, and just to be clear, today's build isn't about doing some ridiculous damage or deleting someone with massive one shot. Actually, it's almost the complete opposite. The whole idea of the build that I'm about to show you is to keep draining health and recovering back, sticking to your target no matter how long the fight takes, until you eventually wear them down and win. In some ways, it's pretty similar to the Drain Life Warlock build I made recently, but as some of you pointed out in the comments, that build has one major limitation. If you're not careful with your spell rotation, you can burn through your mana surprisingly quickly, which means you can't necessarily keep fighting forever. But this build is different. The resources we spend help generate the resources we need to keep healing and keep fighting. So instead of slowly running out of fuel, we create a kind of self-sustaining cycle. We keep fighting, we keep healing, and we keep coming back for more, until eventually, the enemy gets tired of fighting us before we get tired of fighting them. The possibilities are pretty much endless when it comes to taking advantage of just how relentless this build is. For example, you can literally kidnap the enemy healer, drag them into the water, and just keep them there. You don't even have to kill them. Just stay alive, waste your time, and keep annoying them until the game is basically over. Originally, this kind of playstyle was really only possible with Blood Death Knight. I actually made a Blood Death Knight video about it a while ago. The whole concept was to keep gripping the same target, dragging them further and further into the water, slowing them down, and basically refusing to let them play the game. Unfortunately, maybe Blizzard saw my video, because in patch 11.2, they added this. If a player is death gripped 3 times within 30 seconds by a Blood Death Knight, they become immune to death grip for 30 seconds. They basically added a targeted nerf to this exact kind of gameplay. That's kind of sad, because ridiculous stuff like this is part of what makes PvP fun. Finding weird mechanics, pushing them as far as possible, and coming up with completely stupid ways to win, that's part of the fun of PvP. Anyway, after that change, I thought this kind of playstyle was basically dead for good. But the restriction only applies to Blood DKs, which means Frost and Unholy can still keep gripping the same target over and over, which means the whole endless kidnapping idea is still possible. The problem was, they just didn't have enough sustain to keep fighting like that for a long time. But with this build, that playstyle is back. Before we go into the build, I want to thank you Overgear for sponsoring this video again. This is actually the 3rd time we have worked together, and one reason I was comfortable doing it again is that communication with them has always been quick and straightforward. Now, I personally spend way too much time testing builds, talents, and setups in PvP, but obviously, not everyone has that kind of time. So if you're coming back for Season 2, or you just want someone experienced to look at what you are doing wrong, their self-play PvP coaching might actually be useful. You play on your own account, and they can go through your talents, gear, macros, weak auras, and gameplay with you. And this month, you can use my promo code for 12% off, which is higher than their normal discount. So if that sounds useful to you, you can check out Overgear through the link in the description. I tried a lot of different things to make this concept work, and there were plenty of failures along the way. It took a long time, but eventually, I managed to get the build pretty close to what I originally had in mind. There are basically 2 main things that make this build work. The first is the constant self-healing from Vampiric Strike through the Shanlane hero talent, and the second is the PvP talent Stitchmaster, which heals me every time one of my lesser ghouls dies. So the whole idea was to push both of these healing sources as far as I possibly could. And the first thing I tried was a full haste setup. Haste gives you faster rune regeneration, a shorter global cooldown, which means you can cycle through your abilities much faster. So my original idea was keep summoning lesser ghouls over and over, and every time those ghouls die, Stitchmaster gives me another bit of health back. But I found the biggest problem with this setup pretty quickly. It had plenty of sustain, but almost no real kill pressure. It doesn't matter how long you can keep yourself alive, if you can never actually kill the person you're fighting. Eventually, you still get worn down. And that's where mastery becomes so important for Unholy DKs. A huge part of Unholy's damage comes from shadow damage and your minions, and mastery increases both of them. The healing loop worked, but the damage didn't. So even though the full haste version was extremely hard to wear down, without enough mastery to actually threaten the enemy, I couldn't really call it a complete build. So in the end, I decided to split my stats roughly half mastery and half haste. That gave me balance I was looking for. I still had enough haste to keep cycling through my rooms and summoning plenty of lesser ghouls, but now I also had enough mastery to actually create some real kill pressure. And as you probably know, I usually prefer building my gear around the stats I actually want, even if that means giving up some versatility. It's definitely a more aggressive setup, but for builds like this, I think it's worth it. And here's something useful to keep in mind. Engineering crafted goggles, bracers, and boots can use cogwheels that put their secondary stat budget into one single stat. So if you want to push something like haste or mastery really hard, those slots give you another way to fine-tune the build. For the talents, I went with hybrid of minions and diseases. And actually, I worked so hard going all in on diseases, and it was actually how this build first started from, but it didn't work. In Midnight, so much of Unholy's core gameplay revolves around its minions, and right now, the pet focus setup is simply much easier to make work in PvP. Anyway, the most important goal with this build is to summon as many lesser ghouls as possible and as often as possible. The basic loop is pretty simple. Festering Strike gives you lesser ghoul stacks, and then Scourge Strike consumes those stacks to actually summon the ghouls. And this is why Festering Thief is extremely important. After Festering Strike, you get a Festering Thief that costs no runes, while giving you another 2 to 3 lesser ghoul stacks. The key to this build is knowing when to go in and when to get out. When you get into melee range, build your lesser ghoul stacks as quickly as possible, then create distance again. Because Unholy isn't a spec where you want to stand toe to toe with someone and trade damage forever. Your real strength is being able to keep pressure on them even after you have backed away. Keep them slowed, let your minions and diseases keep doing damage, and force them to chase you. That's what makes this build so annoying to fight. Vampiric Strike and Stitchmaster gives you sustain, but they don't make you immortal. You still need to kite. And when you combine that kiting with constant healing and passive pressure, that's when this build becomes really hard to kill. Then we have Doomed Bidding. Whenever you consume Sudden Doom with Death Quill, you summon another lesser ghoul. With Harbinger of Doom making this even better, Sudden Doom procs more often. And every time Scourge Strike summons a lesser ghoul, it also reduces the cooldown of Putrefy. And Putrefy itself summons another lesser ghoul. So you can probably see the loop starting to form here. More ghoul stacks means more Scourge Strikes, and more Scourge Strikes means more ghouls, and faster Putrefy resets. And more Putrefy means even more ghouls. There are 2 more talents that help push this even further. Soul Ripper can consume up to 3 lesser ghoul stacks and summon all of them immediately. The Charlemagne hero talent gives us even more sustain. The Blood is Life summons a Blood Beast whenever we use Dark Transformation. It stores part of the damage it deals, and when it expires, it explodes and heals us based on that damage. But the most important talent here is Gift of Charlemagne. Every Vampiric Strike gives us a stack of Essence of Blood Queen, which gives us bonus haste, and during Dark Transformation, it makes those stacks much stronger while also replacing Scourge Strike with Vampiric Strike. So we can build up a pretty significant amount of haste just by doing our normal rotation. Because we are investing heavily into mastery with our gear, this bonus haste helps make up for a lot of haste we gave up. So the basic fighting style is pretty simple. Like I said, whenever you get into melee range, use Festering Strike and Festering Sight to build as many lesser ghoul stacks as you can. Then start creating distance again, and while you're kiting, use Scourge Strike to keep summoning those ghouls. And whenever you build up runic power, dump it into Death Coil. Oh, and I almost forgot about PvP talents. For this build, Stitchmaster is obviously mandatory, The whole sustain concept is built around it. Personally, I always take Doom Burst. Without it, the damage just feels a little too weak for me. And the extra slow from Death Coil also fits this Kiden playstyle really well. For the last slot, I usually switch between Spell Warden and Strangulate, depending on the situation. And one last thing, do not take Rot and Wither. Seriously. I have tested a lot of bad PvP talents over the years, but this might be one of the most useless ones I have ever seen. At this point, you might be wondering, okay, I get it, this build is hard to kill, but can it actually kill anyone? And again, Unholy DK isn't really about deleting someone with one massive hit. Our damage comes from constant pressure. We keep wearing them down with diseases and minions, and when it's time to burst, we simply overwhelm them with everything at once. So before going in, try to save at least 2 Petrified charges, and ideally all 3. Line up Army of the Dead and Dark Transformation, use Soul Ripper, and start dumping your Putrefied charges while you're attacking with Vampire Strike. Any runic power you generate goes straight into Death Coil, and then you really don't have to do anything fancy. Your diseases and army of minions will take care of the rest. You're not going to delete someone in the blink of an eye with this build. Instead, you keep forcing fight after fight with constant healing and overwhelming number of minions, until eventually, they just can't keep up anymore. And from the enemy's perspective, this is actually incredibly annoying to deal with. They can't easily get away from you, but killing you isn't easy either. And the worst part is, you don't even give them the courtesy of ending the fight quickly. You just keep chasing them, healing yourself, sending more ghouls after them, and refusing to go away. Eventually, they run out of ways to deal with you. And personally, I think Unholy DK is just a really fun spec. Blizzard describes Evoker as a mid-range class, but to me, Evoker still feels like a range class that just happens to have a shorter range. But Midnight Unholy feels more like a true mid-range spec. You go into melee range to build up your lesser goal stacks with Festering Strike, then you back off and spend those stacks from range with Scourge Strike, while your diseases and minions keep chasing the target. So you're constantly moving in and out of melee range, instead of permanently committing to either one. And that's probably my favorite thing about this build. It doesn't have a ridiculous one-shot damage, but as long as you keep your rune and runic power cycle going, you can keep the fight going for an absurdly long time. You go in, build resources, pull back out, send in more ghouls, heal yourself, and then do it all over again. And interestingly, this build can actually become harder to finish off when your health gets low. You have little defensive talents like Blood Draw, which activates below 30% health, giving you extra heal, reduces the damage you take, and even make Death Strike cheaper for a few seconds. Then there's Blood Bond. Whenever you drop below 50% health, your ghoul starts sacrificing some of his own health to heal you every second. Neither of these effects is amazing by itself, but that's really the whole point of this build. A little healing from Blood Bond, a little from Blood Draw, more from Vampiric Strike, and then every lesser ghoul that dies gives you another heal through Stitch Master. None of these numbers look crazy on their own, but when you put all of those small heals together, they add up to a surprising amount of sustain. Here, this Warlock came in thinking I was low enough to finish off, and I think this is where the build probably started getting really frustrating for him. My health never really went back to full, but it just kept bouncing around 50% without actually dropping much lower. Meanwhile, his health was doing the exact opposite. It wasn't disappearing quickly, but it was going down slowly and consistently, and eventually, that slow pressure becomes enough to win the fight. And despite what you might expect from Death Knight, I actually think this build is at its best in smaller fights, especially in 1v1s or small skirmishes. Death Knight has a lot of tools that make it extremely difficult to control. Icebound Fortitude deals with stuns, Lichborn handles fear, charm, and sleep. And you still have tools like anti-magic shell on top of that, so even if the fight takes a long time, this build is very good at simply refusing to lose. And that's where it becomes useful for the team. If one enemy can't deal with you alone, eventually they have to send a second player to help. and the moment two people are busy trying to kill you, your team gets a numbers advantage somewhere else on the map. That's really the strength of this build. You don't need a healer following you around. You can take one fight, survive it, move straight into another one, and just keep going. And let's be clear, Xianglane Unholy is definitely not the meta right now. In fact, if you look at the highest rated Unholy DKs, almost everyone is playing Rider of the Apocalypse. In Blitz, among the current top 50 Unholy DKs, not a single one is playing Xianglane. So yes, we are definitely playing the unpopular build here, but I choose to look at that positively. Because if Xianglane is already this far down, there is plenty of room for Blizzard to buff it. You know what they say, the night is darkest just before the dawn. So maybe we're not playing a bad build. Maybe we are just early.